So this is the cybersecurity presentation. My name is John Pohlman. I'm the director over the IT security consulting practice at Tanner LLC. I'm going to be doing the first 20 minutes or so of this, and then I'll pass it over to Hoole, who is going to take a look at the second 20 minutes about it. I will be talking about risk mitigation, and he's going to talk about risk transferring of risk. If anyone has any questions, feel free to raise them. I definitely would love to answer direct questions anyone may have, or discuss anything specifically that any of you have. To get into this, I was reading an article just last week, and it compared the, well, let me ask by a show of hands. How many of you think it would be more damaging to your body to eat a strawberry over an egg? Who thinks it would be worse for you to eat a strawberry? Hands? How many of you think it's worse to eat an egg? Couple of, oh wow, majority. So I was reading this article, and it talked about how strawberries absorb more pesticides and chemicals than any other fruit or vegetable. And I read this article, and I legitimately thought I was going to die. I have eaten so many strawberries in my life, I thought that I was a walking pesticide pretty much. No more than a couple hours later, I was reading an article about eggs, and that in a single yolk of egg is half of your body's caloric intake, not caloric, cholesterol in one day. So I'm thinking, man, I can read one article here and just about think I'm going to die because I ate strawberries. Read another one and I'm about to die because I like eggs in the morning. And put in perspective that no matter what you do, if you read one article, you can go from total opposites. Right now, if you open up an ad or an article, you will see that there are X amount of thousands of data breaches every single day, and that every company is going to get hacked, and if you're not hacked, you will be. But I want you just to take a step back and realize that you're hearing the worst of the worst. And I want to talk a little bit more about this, and we'll circle back around with this in the end. The goals for the presentation today are, first, I want to talk about why retirement centers are hotbeds. Second, saloons have sticky walls. And lastly, I'm going to finally talk about onions are good but taste terribly. All right? First, I'd like to talk about who are the actual hackers. Who are hacking? Who are the hackers out there? And why are they doing this? This picture, guy with a hoodie, usually no face, is what we think of when we think of a hacker. Usually in a basement, dark room, parents' basement normally, low hygiene. These are the hackers. But in all candor, these guys went away in probably about the mid to late 90s. The single, one-off, lone wolf type hackers are not what we're dealing with today. What we're dealing with today are retirement centers. This lady, Grandma Sue, she lived in a retirement center in Oklahoma. She was looking online and trying to find ways to make a few extra bucks. And she came across this site that said, hey, you can send out emails and you'll make $5,000 to $7,000 additionally a month. So she did it. She paid the $2.99, and then she paid the $49 to allow someone to remote into her computer, set everything up, so all she had to do was click a button and send emails with that link in it. And what she was sending out was ransomware. And she sent out hundreds of thousands of emails. The hackers that we know today are completely different. In all truthfulness, this is what we're dealing with. Spiders and robots and machines that are scanning and scouring the internet. Hundreds of millions of websites, IP addresses, VPNs, every single hour. This is what we're dealing with. We're not dealing with these guys. Not to say that there are not bad people out there that are writing code and trying to get in, but this is what the majority of people in the state of Utah are dealing with. Our machines, our robots, our automated scripts and scans that are testing your systems. So, why do people do this? Any thoughts?
Make money.
Make money. Yes. But the myth is, if I break into your system, I'm going to steal your social security numbers or your PII that you have on your system. When in actuality, I don't care if I'm a hacker. I don't care about your PII. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to sell it immediately on the black market. Currently, as of yesterday, clean Social Security numbers are going for $1. How many Social Security numbers are you going to have to get to make this worth your time? That is why ransomware, about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago, took off so rampantly. Because I could send an email, you could click on it, it would encrypt your data, it would scramble your data, and you could pay a couple $100, a couple $1,000, even tens of thousands of dollars to get your data unscrambled. They were able to monetize like that their actions. And let's talk about a breach that we dealt with a Utah-based company just a couple months ago. They were breached, but in looking at all the traction of everything, we had identified that their VPN was broken into. And then it took about three and a half weeks. What that person did is they went out to the black market and said, hey, I've got a recipe on how to get into this VPN of a pretty large company. And he sold it. Next person bought it. Got a little bit further, sold it. Next person bought it and sold it until it was bought and sold 4 times. And the last person went in, exfiltrated a whole bunch of data, and sold it. Every single one of these people are chasing the money. So you need to understand, if you have that in mind, that is the reason people are hacking, is to make money. Okay? Does that make sense? So diving this a little bit deeper. So how does an organization like yours prevent these automated bots and these robots and these people making money? I talked about it in the previous one. I see a lot of familiar faces. And that is based on risk. Every single one of your IT departments need to be doing risk assessments on a regular basis. PCI, the exact verbiage of it is on a regular basis. If you get hacked, you're not doing them on a regular enough basis. But on a regular basis. What this is understanding the risk in your organization. Let's take, for example, email fraud. That's a very common one. Email fraud is actually right now a very high likelihood that something will happen. Email fraud for a CFO. If that happens, the impact on the organization is very high, making this a very high risk. Outlining all of the IT risk in an organization is the only way that you can understand how you are doing. It's a great benchmark for understanding what's going on. Let's talk about flood insurance. Flood insurance of a 6th floor building in downtown Salt Lake. The likelihood of something like that happening is probably fairly low that we'll suffer a flood. The impact will be pretty high if we did have a flood on our server equipment. So that would probably be a medium risk. Going through all of your risks and identifying them one by one, understanding where you are, what's the likelihood and the impact of that risk on your organization. That is the only way that you can start identifying and combating what's going on today. This is a picture of Shooting Star Saloon in Huntsville, Utah. If anyone's had a Starburger up there, fantastic. As you walk in, you notice that there's money all across the ceiling of the saloon. This only happens in saloons because they have sticky ceilings and sticky walls. Organizations who don't understand their risk are throwing money against the wall and it's not sticking. Unless you understand very precisely your risk and how much of it it's mitigating by every action you're performing, you're throwing money at the wall. There are some really good salespeople out there. They're selling these AI, these machine learning devices that if you just plug in your network, you're completely fine. Nothing will ever happen. But in candor, that is false. I gave an example earlier that you buy the security system for your home and you go out of town and you leave your garage door open. That is what a lot of organizations are doing by just leaving their garage door open. I've got this box, I've got the security system, it'll stop everything. No, it won't. It'll just tell you that you lost something. It won't stop it. So you need to understand your risk before you go out and buy these these fancy Star Wars-like boxes, and you're buying this machine learning, this AI, and they're selling. Did you hear the guy on this panel this morning? Autocorrect is machine learning. Autocorrect autocorrect is AI. Let's simplify, let's boil down this AI to what it really is. If someone sold you devices had AI on it and all it had was Word with autocorrect, would you kind of feel a little bit taken? It's what a lot of these security devices are doing. They have a lot of this AI. You need to understand your risk. You need to understand what the likelihood of that happening and the impact on your organization, and go from the top down. So, when we're out doing risk assessments, I grabbed the top 4. These are the top 4 risks we see on a daily basis. These are the things that are high likelihood, high impact. And I'll give you some really no-cost solutions on how to solve some of these. The first one. I sat on a roundtable 2 weeks ago with a bunch of CIOs in the state of Utah. There were 6 of us, there were no vendors. And we're just sitting around talking about IT security and what can be done. And without anything being said, every single one of them said employees are the weakest link in this. And I, as a security professional, agree with that. That you can have the most incredible IT security system, but every one of your employees are the weakest link normally. Because these emails that are being received by the Prince of Zimbabwe that are asking for $1,000 to get a visa so that you can receive your $32 million. These are actually happening, and you laugh. And you're laughing because you've seen them, but they keep on coming because they work. Emails are by far the biggest risk to IT security. Your employees are the most likely. It blows my mind how an organization will allow an employee to download a coupon printer so they can save 30 cents on their next Chick-fil-A order, and everything that's embedded in the back end of that coupon printer that's being downloaded to that computer. It blows my mind. Additional font. How many fonts does Word have? Like 5,000? And people have to download additional fonts that are online? It blows my mind. Employees are the weakest link. I personally have not found a way to fix this problem. The best thing that we have seen is to test them, to train them, to make sure you have a policy, test them against that policy, train them against that policy, test them, train them, and keep on going. Tanner, about 5 years ago, was probably at about a 45 to 50% failure rate on just an email being sent in. Now, we're between 3 and 5%. But that's still 5% of our employees are clicking on malicious links and putting in confidential information into the websites. It's bad. Yes, question.
Our organization receives a lot of those phishing attempts.
Yep.
I've wondered if it's because our email addresses are so predictable.
Yep.
Is there any truth to that?
Oh yeah. When we're doing a test, it is so easy to find an entire database of company email addresses because LinkedIn has where you're working. You can predict an email address very simply. And so to gather an entire email list for an entire organization probably takes maybe 2 hours. It's very simple.
So if we had email addresses that weren't so standard, would we see a decrease in those phishing emails?
You may see a small, but there's small things that you can do. Talk to me after, because your IT team can write rules for your email system to block spoofed email and to block email getting in. They don't come standard in Microsoft Office 365 or in Gmail. But there's things that can be done, but it's not going to stop it. Because if just one gets in and one employee clicks on it, game over. Let's go on to two-factor authentication. 2FA. Most of you should know what this is. If you haven't logged into a bank recently for your personal accounting. Two-factor authentication is knowing something and having something. So if I go to my bank and I type in my username and password, is that two-factor? No, that's one factor. That's something I know. I know my username and I know my password. If I put in my username, password, and my mother's maiden name, is that now two-factor? No. Is that still something I know? Two-factor is knowing something and having something. It has now become socially acceptable that when you log into your bank, it'll send you a text message, and it'll give you 6-digit code. Put in the 6-digit code. That is two-factor authentication. That's how they can authenticate, making sure that you are who you say you are because you know something, username and password, and you have something, a phone, to receive text messages. CFO fraud is rampant right now. In the past 6 months, I'm blown away with how much CFOs are being targeted on malicious emails. They can guess, they can hack, they can break into your email account, and they will sit in there and they'll just watch all the email coming in. They'll download it. These are robots. These aren't people with the hoodies and the no face. They're sitting there just reading everything that's going on. They're creating a plan. And then as soon as your calendar says, hey, I'm going out of town, guess what happens? An email goes to the controller, to a VP of finance, saying, hey, I know I just left. I need this invoice paid immediately. The client needs this done immediately. They asked us to change the wire directions, the wire account. Make sure this happens immediately. This is going on like crazy. I have never seen it so rampant right now. CFOs in the audience, this is happening whether you know this or not. The way you combat this is put two-factor authentication on your email accounts. Making sure that it's not just a username and password to get into it. It's a username and password plus a text message. And then, when you get this text message that someone's trying to log into your account and it wasn't you, click no. It blows my mind. Just talking to a very large organization just Friday. The CFO, they have two-factor. There was a controller that was getting into the account and doing some things for him. So he got accustomed to saying, hey, was this you logging in? He just kept on saying yes. And then last Friday, someone else tried to get into his account, and he clicked yes, and they let them in. Two-factor authentication. Know something, have something. Set this up on email accounts, on all remote connections. If you're connecting to your office or to any of your data remotely, make sure that you put two-factor authentication on that connection. Okay? Does that make sense? Yes.
Is there a way to make that? I mean, if that takes 15 seconds every time I check email, that's a big
No. As soon as you log in for the first time,
So first time.
it will put a token on your computer. And then whenever you log in and you have a token on your computer, it'll go right through. But if you're on a different computer and you log in, it'll say, whoa, this isn't you. I don't recognize you. Let me send you a text message.
And that has acceptable security in your email.
Oh yes, it's better than not having it. The contrary is astounding. Good question. Any other questions? Patch management. Man, this is geeky. This is really nerdy stuff. Last year there were 16,000 exploits that were written. Let's take, for example, an exploit is a recipe. A hacker found a way to break into a Microsoft Office 2008 R2 server, or a Cisco switch, or a firewall. He found a way to crack in because the code let him in. So he writes the process of how he did it in a recipe, and he posts that recipe online so anyone in the world can use that recipe and access the information. Last year there were 16,000 recipes written. Because of that, there are 53 data breaches. Every device that touches the internet needs an update. Microsoft Office spends millions upon millions of dollars patching and rewriting their code because of these recipes that are being written. The second Tuesday of every month, Patch Tuesday. It releases these updates and these patches. Making sure and verifying that all your systems are patched every single month is important. I can tell you that none of your organizations have 100% patch updates. It is very, 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 very few of you run updates on a very regular cadence. Performing a vulnerability assessment is an automated tool, a scan that goes out and verifies which patches have been run and which ones have not been run, and gives that to you, the CFO, as the person who oversees IT, saying, here's what needs to be done. IT, get this done, report back to me tomorrow after this is done. It's not as simple as just saying run, 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 run. There is some backup, there is some testing that needs to be done. But patch management is a very sincere thing that you need to do. Going out of town, leaving your garage door open, that is the easiest way. If there is a way to get into your system and it's publicly written, this is it right here. Okay, onions. Onions taste terribly, they make you cry. The reason I want to talk about onions is because onions are like security. You cannot think of security as one single layer. You need a layer upon layer upon layer for your security in order for it to work. Security needs multiple layers. You need to make sure that you're doing multiple things and you can't rely on one singular person, one singular device. One point of failure is not what you can do anymore. Lastly, we talked about recognizing risk. If you don't learn anything else from this presentation, you need to understand that you cannot spend money. You're throwing money at the wall unless you understand precisely the percentage of risk you're mitigating by putting $10,000 into security. Or you're spending $5,000 for a consultant to do something for you. Make sure you know very clearly the percentage of risk mitigated by doing that action. If you're not, you're throwing money against the wall. You're not doing anything that sticks. Test your systems. Perform these risk assessments internally. Make sure you understand risk and perform the vulnerability assessments. And then lastly, start now. Because if you don't start now, something will happen. It's just a matter of when. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Spence.
Thanks, John. All great stuff. So we're just going out of mic here. You guys can hear me okay? So I'm going to talk more about the transferring of risk on the side. So we're an insurance firm. I'm Spence Hoole. I'm with Diversified Insurance. And we insure hundreds of companies and provide cyber insurance to them. Some of the largest online companies in the Intermountain region are clients of ours. And so what I'm going to come from is more of a perspective of less statistics, since I have a little comment about cyber statistics in a minute, but more anecdotal things that we see in terms of claims and incidents, in terms of breaches and things that can be helpful, and what the true value is of one of these cyber policies, just some thoughts from risk transfer. So I'm not going to hit on too many of these things because John's talked about these already, but I will tell you the two biggest ones we see in terms of incidents. It's phishing, right? And it's ransomware. But phishing is a huge problem because, and the reason it's the biggest problem is it's so simple. So you can kind of see some stuff up there in terms of some of the cybersecurity challenges of 2019 and 2020. John talked about this too. Employees are definitely your weakest link, but they can also be your most powerful and strongest defense mechanism. Okay, so again, email issues, loss of device, all that kind of stuff. But we're going to talk about cybersecurity training. What I think helps a lot in terms of, John had some really good practical stuff in terms of risk control. If you look at this, what I found in talking to companies and working with our own company is the most simple policies and procedures are the best. In terms of, good use of passwords. Making sure that when you're getting together as an employee group, even if it's not a meeting about cybersecurity, it could be just a town hall, take 5 minutes and talk about some anecdotal thing that happened. If somebody got a phishing email and it looks really good, legitimate, that you're able to catch it, share it with the group. Share anecdotes about, and we do a lot of that because we try to pass on information like, hey, here's something that happened to a client in terms of something that took place with an incident. Obviously, keep it proprietary, and we don't need to divulge specific names and things like that, but in terms of case studies, it can be very helpful. So sharing anecdotes and best practices, and whether it's on a personal level or a business level, it's amazing. And, we always think about the Nigerian prince, email. Actually, they're getting so much better. And how sophisticated they can become. In fact, we had one where somebody in our office was working on a bond, and they got a phishing email that looked like it was from the same company requesting a surety bond and having to put in some credential information. So double check, authenticate, all those type of things. So I'm big into anecdotal training and keeping it really simple. Get rid of the PowerPoints. There's my statistic right there, lies, damn lies, and cybersecurity stats. Have you ever seen those? Like, 89% of all companies have experienced a breach in the past 60 days. What does that mean? What is a breach? And so I spent a lot of time looking at cyber stats, and as you kind of peel back, you realize they're all over the place. And what I love to do in a presentation like this is just make up tons of them. So anyway, be careful of that kind of stuff. So let's talk about risk transfer for a second here. And really what's happening is people need to stop thinking about like, hey, you're not going to stop every threat. An employee's going to lose a laptop, right? Something's going to happen. We need to start thinking and investing more in response and remediation. And so in terms of if something does happen, what's the best way that we can deal with this type of thing? We're not going to stop every ransomware attack. What can we do in terms of backups and procedures to make sure that we mitigate that potential threat? And so we're going to talk a little bit about cyber insurance in terms of what the value of that is, because I'm sure some of you guys have had experience with that, maybe purchased that, maybe your company has it, or at least you've thought about it. And I'm not here to shield cyber insurance coverage, but I do want to talk about some of the things to think about. So the first thing, it's a modular type policy. You can bolt a lot of stuff on these cyber policies, okay, including like tech errors and omissions if you're a technology developer, or if you're if you have some sort of professional E&O exposure, you can bolt that onto it as well. But here are some thoughts about it. So the market, like 10 years ago, there were like 6 carriers writing cyber insurance. It wasn't hugely popular. A lot of financial institutions, healthcare companies had it. Today, there's over 100 different insurance carriers that are writing, including WCF, the Workers' Compensation Fund of Utah, shockingly, has a cyber solution for small businesses. Why this is good for you is it creates supply and capacity. You have insurance companies trying to get into the game. They realize this growing exposure, and so they want to have a product or a solution. Which means that even though you read these cyber statistics about the number of incidents and breach and these big things that hit the front page, the cost of cyber insurance is going down dramatically. In fact, sometimes like by a factor of 10 or 15%, or not percent, but 15 times, I should say. So that's the good news. Lots of capacity, prices going down. Even right now, we've got basically a hard market in the insurance world, like property, auto, especially public company D&O insurance, which we do a lot of. Really hard market. That's not good for buyers. But most cyber renewals that we're dealing with you're seeing some material rate reductions. The one thing about the coverage, though, is it's not manuscript in terms of there's not like, you think about like a standardized insurance policy, like your homeowner's insurance policy, your homeowner's policy would look very similar to mine. Not true in cyber insurance. There can be A placements and D placements. So you want to make sure you work with a sophisticated broker on that. The other thing about this is, and what cyber insurers have done, this is really kind of the secrets of the sauce, is they've taken a play out of the workers' compensation insurance booklet. So workers' compensation carriers a long time ago realized, look, what can we do about helping companies control their costs, helping to take care of workers? Let's think about loss control and safety. So they started working a lot on safety programs and trying to mitigate frequency and severity in employee claims, or workplace injuries, I should say. So cyber carriers have done a lot of that kind of stuff. And so what you have, and this is the value, I'm going to flip the page, well, let me go back one more here. I think one of the big values of these cyber policies, these carriers give you both pre- and post-breach resources. Because the thought process is if we can help provide some stuff and services up front to help maybe reduce frequency, and then if something does happen, let's provide some services and resources to help mitigate that. And so that's a real positive thing about this thing. In fact, I would tell you that in the last, and again, I'm speaking more anecdotally here, but if I look at the claims that we have come in, the breaches and the incidents, I would say the vast majority of them are what we call first-party claims. So they're not being sued, they've had an incident, and they're using the policy resources to help mitigate that. But a lot of them get satisfied or resolved within the policy deductible or retention. But the value of this is that the insurance company has these experts that step in and really help guide the insured through that process. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But that's a huge part of these policies. By the way, my little kind of metric down there, for every $1 spent on insurance, invest at least 10 times that on cybersecurity and internal controls. The kind of stuff that John was talking about. Some simple things, but people think, oh, I just got to buy insurance. Well, insurance, again, it's kind of a paradox. It's good to have. It's not the best first response, though, right? Because, so what if you have insurance? If you're locked out of your system and you can't do anything about it right now, that's not really going to help you a whole lot if your company's suffering. Let's go to this next slide here, again, to these pre-breach and post-breach resources. So you can kind of see this. And really what the thought is, if you have an incident, these insurance carriers have learned that if they can help control the loss potential upstream, it's going to mitigate potential claims downstream. So what's happening, these policies, by the way, have both first and third-party coverages. First-party coverages mean that it's like a property claim. It's between you and the insurance company. A third-party claim is when somebody comes in and brings a claim against you, some litigation or lawsuit. But these post-breach resources, really, it's really reducing that third-party liability exposure. So most of these cyber policies will give you like a bucket of insurance to spend on, notification, credit monitoring, forensics, PR, this hotline. These things are so valuable. The hotline 24/7 report an incident. One example I'll share is about a year ago I was driving home late at night from work. The CFO of one of our clients called me on my cell phone, large financial institution, and he first said, "Hey, are you in town?" I said, "Yes." And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm driving home from work." And he said, "You're going to want to pull over." And when I heard that, that's not what you want to hear, right? And somebody's going to tell you something, but before they tell you, they need you to sit down or pull over in your car. So he went on to inform me that what happened is they were implementing a large HR platform. And someone was able to, some hacker was able to notice that through social media and was able to fish his way into the company and compromised and accessed 112 employee emails and accounts. And when I say accounts, they were able to get into the payroll system and take 112 of the 3,500 employees and change the routing number on their direct deposit. So instead of going into Wells Fargo or Zions account, it was going into some other account, right? And then they had, one of those 112 employees was an HR administrator, so they had personal identifiable information for all the other employees. So super serious stuff. We immediately got this hotline on, which is basically attorneys that do this all day long. There's some pretty reputable law firms, but they're giving guidance and helping companies and direct them. And I'll tell you, that first 15 minutes of that call was worth every dime of that policy, okay? This person just knew exactly kind of how to guide them, what to do, what they should be thinking about. And long story short, that whole entire thing, I was doing the math at home last night, or not last night, but the night it happened, thinking, okay, what's the payroll number, the average employee, trying to do some quick math in terms of how this could, impact and what type of claim we're looking at here. The great thing is, what I thought for the first 24, 40 hours is going to be about a 7-figure claim, turned out to be about $35,000, as they were able to recover a bunch of these, the payroll that went to the wrong accounts. So pretty interesting stuff, but yeah, the insurance company stepped in big time. So why the insurance company didn't pay a dime on that? Because it was all within the $75,000 retention this company had. Invaluable in terms of the help they received. This is what I was talking about, sort of the mechanics of the policy. You've got your third-party and first-party coverages, different modules, privacy, network security. We're not going to spend a lot of time. I'd be happy to give these slides to anybody that wants to come up and get them. Afterwards, I'll email them to you. And again, the first and third-party coverages. So these cyber policies are just like this package policy that gives you very robust coverage on these type of things. So cyber extortion all the way to, like I talked about before, coverage for third-party liability suits. There's an example of a policy, both first and third-party coverages. We're just going to skip that. Let's just talk about the regulatory environment. We should probably flip out the logo there because GDPR was a couple years ago in May of 2018 when that was implemented. By the way, a lot of consternation before that. A lot of our companies that we work with have operations and sell over in the EU. We haven't seen, for ourselves, we haven't seen a whole lot of claim activity there. There's been some big ones that have hit the news, like Marriott Corporation and the fine they received. The big one that's coming up is the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act, and that's coming up in January of 2020. And the thing about this is, and I'll just tell you something about cyber policies, they do cover regulatory cost issues. So they'll cover fines and penalties. They're one of the few insurance policies that do. You compare that to like a D&O insurance policy. D&O insurance policies don't cover fines and penalties. The reason being is Some people think, and it's like punitive damage. They think it's against public policy to cover fines and penalties, and so a company should have to, pay those out. But cyber policies are pretty broad in that standpoint. The question is the coverage trigger? So most of those policies, to get coverage triggered under that, you have to have some sort of incident or breach. But what if you just get a privacy violation? So nothing happens, there's been no breach, but they just come to an audit on your system or whatever, and they find you not compliant, like in GDPR, and they fine you for that. That's probably not going to be covered on most cyber policies because it doesn't trigger the coverage. So just things to think about, but it's good to make sure you have regulatory cost coverage on it. You want to make sure it's broad as possible. But again, it may not be insurable everywhere, and there may not be a coverage trigger. By the way, so even in the EU you might have it, but some EU countries may not allow you to use insurance to pay the fine. It's kind of like punitive damages in the United States. There's some states that even though you may have punitive damage coverage on your liability policies, they don't allow you to use insurance for it because the state thinks that if you're being punished for something, you shouldn't be able to transfer that risk to somebody else. So just things to think about there. I'll just hit on this real quickly. Do we have any public companies here? One? Couple? So we do a lot of discussion with the boards and audit committees of our clients. It used to be we'd go into audit committees and board meetings and talk specifically about like their D&O insurance program, which we still do a lot, especially in this market. But the last few years, they've asked us to come in and talk about their cyber insurance program, and then talk about things about, if you're a public company, what type of disclosures and things that you should be doing. Well, the SEC came out with some additional guidance in 2018 that was sort of expansive guidance on things that were, that they would say would be mandatory disclosures in the event of a cyber incident or breach. So definitely things that, that boards of public companies should be thinking about. And really what it gets down to is, if you've had something material, it needs to be disclosed to investors, right? And then the question is, what's material? And they basically say it's something that would be critical to your operation. So there's some gray area there, but definitely, just sitting on a breach information and not disclosing it to investors is definitely a problem. If you trade on that information, you actually go to jail, which we found out in the Equifax case. And here's one of the big ones that happened. So you had definitely Equifax, somebody trading on that breach, insider trading. They ended up spending 8 months in home confinement. But then you look at Yahoo, where they didn't disclose a breach either. They ended up with an SEC fine of $35 million, a securities class action suit of $80 million, data breach class action suit of $50 million, derivative suit of $29 million, and Verizon revised their purchase price by about $350 million. So sort of costly not to disclose that. So anyway, the most effective cybersecurity disclosure controls and procedures are built when the company directors and officers are informed about the risk and incidents that a company has faced or is likely to face. So the thing about it is, and this is whether you're public or private, good practice is to always do the right thing. If you have some sort of incident or breach that's going to impact stakeholders in your company or shareholders, definitely disclose, get it out, work through those things, and try to be responsible corporate citizens. So that's a little bit on risk transfer. What were we going to do? We're going to field a few questions, John? Yeah. So come on up. We can field some questions. We can talk about the beautiful sliders we had for lunch or whatever you guys want. But
we tried in this presentation to cover the risk mitigation and the risk transfer. I think Spencer did a great job talking about how to transfer some of the risk. Question? Yes, blue shirt.
Yeah. When we're sharing sensitive documents with someone outside the organization, we try to do so through a secure data room or something. When you're sharing sensitive documents within the organization, so one company email to another company email, should we be thinking about not doing that, not attaching it, if it's within the same company email?
So I can take this, but so your domain, for example, what he's referring to is if I'm on Tanner's domain, I'm in Tanner's building, and I have a document that I'm attaching, and I'm sending it to someone else within my organization, it's not leaving my server, is that secure? Technically, yes. The caveat, the asterisk, the massive asterisk is, if there is a compromised account on the system, no. Because that that sensitive information can now then be exfiltrated very easily. So I would say if you're already using a practice of using a third-party software to transfer and store critical sensitive data, use that internally as well. Does that make sense? Good question.
Yeah, the other thing to think about on that is, like, so a lot of our clients, they want to wire their insurance premiums to us, and we just don't get wire instructions via email anymore. So sometimes, I mean, this is a little bit related, but we'll just call up and give them to them over the phone. And then when we have requests that come in, we were talking about the social engineering exposure with CFO attacks, and the ones that, where the CFO, they get an email saying, wire this money or do this quickly. It's the best way to kind of just pick up the phone and go talk to that person. And it's like, you work with your banks today, they do the same type of thing. So sometimes old school, so to your question, really sensitive document, hard copy, walk it down. Sometimes the basic things are just helpful today in today's world with all the electronic privacy and stuff that's going on.
What was your question?
I've actually had that example happen to me as well. Wire instructions.
Yeah.
But anyway, patches.
Patch management.
Yeah, so talk about how like a word patch would affect anything else in your network.
Okay.
Because you generally
Yes.
think, okay, well, how exposed am I if they can access somewhere?
So let's talk about patches. And I flew through that pretty quickly. The 16,000 patches or recipes that were published last year, or exports that were published last year. So let's talk about, instead of like Word, let's talk about your firewall, or a server, or a switch, or even your cell phone. All of you have updates on your cell phones all the time. How does that affect? If I get into your network from somebody clicking on a device or on a link, and I'm now sitting inside your network, I can pretty much with 99.99999% certainty traverse across your network, because internally not everything is patched. Most companies do a pretty good job patching the external firewall, your mail server, anything that's external. Internally, no one's going to be accessing that, we'll be fine. But the problem is once someone's in, we can spread very quickly across all machines. I would say we did a test for a publicly traded company in Utah, and we were tested to do an external and then an internal. We got in from the outside, and then we were like, man, they patch everything really well. We found that their printer was not patched. And we were able to get into the printer and sat there, and whenever people were logging in to print jobs to it, we were able to capture their username and password. We sat there for 2 days capturing username and password, and all of a sudden the IT director's username and password came through. We're like, game over. We now have access to all devices because he gave us that information. So patching is important. It's not challenging. It's not hard, but it takes time. And you have to make sure it's done correctly. Did I answer your question in a roundabout way, trying to do that? Word is not the best example.
The other thing about patching is who finds it somewhat inconvenient to do the latest update on their iPhone?
Always when you're doing a spreadsheet, you're always the worst time of the month.
Or you've heard people in your family say, oh, that latest update was horrible, it screwed up my whole system. So what do? You kind of avoid it sometimes.
Yeah.
By the way, the last iPhone update did screw up my Bluetooth system in my car for some reason. It keeps asking me to download something for a password if I don't know what the
Is
password
that a first world problem or what?
It's a problem, all right? But that's why we avoid that kind of stuff. Who here uses password management systems? Useful, right?
But dangerous.
But dangerous, yeah, but at the same time, it saves a ton of time. But that's one thing we're going to be doing in our company here soon, too, is making sure everyone gets on one of those. Because think about just the amount of time that people spend, forgot password, forgot user ID.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many passwords we all have today.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So really quickly, if your browser, Chrome, Firefox, IE, Safari, if they're saving your username and password, that is absolutely not secure. It is saved in clear text. If I get access to your computer, I can download all your username and passwords that are saved in the browser. The password management tool that he's talking about is like a LogMeIn or a LastPass. Those ones are third-party systems that you put your username and password into it where you just need to remember one password. Never, ever, 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 ever store username and passwords in a browser. Does that make sense?
So how do you compare it?
How do you know that it's done?
Oh, you're toast.
So if that does happen, if you go to a website and you don't have LastPass installed on your computer, and it automatically pops up your username and password on there, you're toast.
So when Google pops up and says, we'll securely save your username and password if you want us to, they're lying, and it's not
Oh, you're gonna pull out Google. Google is slightly different. It's not stored. It's in your account. So your account, you're already logged into your account, so it's saved on your account. But if you go from Google and you log into your bank, or let's say Facebook, or an email account, Gmail, and all magically starts popping up, that's insecure. Every time I log in, it says, do you want Google to remember your username and password? No!
Never.
No, never! Don't ever let those save them. Because that is in clear text format. Yes, you're about to, you're like,
Yeah. So can you ever just turn that off so it doesn't ever ask you, because it is so annoying.
Yes,
And I
you-
always say never, and then it always pops up.
yes, you can.
You do that.
Go to your IT team, because sometimes IT people have controls in place that allow you not to do it, and making configuration changes. Your IT team should and can be able to help you with that.
What about like personal
Personally, yes, you can go into the settings and turn it off.
settings?
Yeah.
User security.
Yes.
User security.
Yes.
So when you use two-factor authentication, say you did accidentally click say yes, and then you're like, wait a minute, that's, I didn't mean to. Like, what do you do in the next steps to kind of go through and fix that? Do you have to change, like, is changing a password adequate? Or, I mean, what do you do if that happens?
So you asked two questions. I want to make sure I understand which question you're asking. Because you
So-
threw out two-factor authentication.
Yeah, so I'm saying if there was like a two-factor authentication or something came through and you saw a device that you didn't recognize
Okay.
in there,
Okay.
what steps should you take immediately after that?
Yeah, hold the fire alarm
knowing
pretty
that-
quickly. If you see a device in there that's not yours,
Yes.
you should probably act pretty promptly about that. But two-factor
Yeah,
is
so-
two-factor. So if you're,
I think what she's saying
So
is.
what do you do?
She got the
Because I
second
am
factor
acting
and she
promptly,
said
then I'm
yes.
like, now what?
Oh.
Yeah.
She said yes.
Is changing your password
no.
adequate, or
No.
what do you have to do from there?
So you probably have to remove your account from whatever it was and re-enable it and create another account in there. And I would personally tell you that that account is gone. I don't know what we're talking about. We're talking very vaguely. If that can be done,
Like a Gmail or like a G.
Yeah.
Say your Gmail.
yes. So you want to disable that and make sure that's not used again for business purposes. Two-factor is pretty nice, because if your username gets compromised or your password gets compromised, you still have a second factor that no one can log in without having your cell phone. So two-factor is really, really nice, but you want to protect username and password as much as you can. If something else does get in there and got your second factor, then you need to disable that account completely.
Oh, so you can't just change the two-factor type to be like, phone number or like a text message
So
versus a device?
Yes,
or-
you possibly could, but you have to assume that if someone else is in there, then all the email has been exfiltrated. You don't know what's gone on, and you need to disable that account with whatever that is, so that the data in there, you need to protect that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Just double checking in case that.
The challenge with all this stuff is convenience versus security, right, on everything. Who here uses like the same derivative of their password, or has in the past? Maybe not anymore, but like for a long time I used the word storage, then with a series of numbers afterwards, until finally I got an email one day that said that they had that password. They had the suffix but not the numbers. But it scared me because it was on a lot of my passwords. Because it's simple, right? You just to remember that. I would just change it, 1, 2, 3, whatever the year was, and things like that. And I learned my lesson. I hope nothing happened. This was several years ago, but you got to be careful of that stuff. Any other questions?
We try to make this fun. I really like Spence. Spence is a good dude. He's one of the best insurance providers in the state. He's not up here hawking a shoddy product. And if you do have risk transfer questions, please reach out to him. He's a good dude.
Well, thanks.
I've really enjoyed working with him.
The bar is low when we're talking about insurance. And John does a great job. We've actually had him in. We've had some, one of our clients with some social engineering issues. that was really sophisticated, actually, how they did it. And faulty invoice cost the company about $30,000. You're able to get John and his team helping out there, so.
So can we get two-step authentication of he's a good guy?
He's a good dude, yeah.
The guys that work for me that are here will tell you the same. So will my mom. I'll get her on the phone right now.
Thank you guys, appreciate it.
Thanks.